Hello, everybody. So, well, I'll let Zach in before I start talking. Okay. Hello, everybody. So, looks like we're getting near the end of the semester. Usually, everybody's feeling a little tired and overwhelmed around this point of the semester, but next Monday will be our last class session. So for tonight, I want to finish up that GUI thing. Really just those two other buttons that don't do anything yet, which essentially what we already saw, but there is a slight little kind of a trick. It's not hard to figure out, but often it might not happen on the first try. So I wanted to walk through that whenever we have a pop-up window. It's essentially what we already did. I think we've already seen, but that is a requirement on the final, and there's something that might take a couple tries, might not be your first guess. So I want to walk through that. To really finish up those last two methods, that won't take long. Then we'll get into object-oriented programming, which is the last thing on our list of stuff to learn, really. And we'll talk for that in a little while. And then after that, I have a list of odds and ends to fill out the rest of the time, because there's still lots and lots of things we can talk about with software development. So a list of things that I think will be useful. One that's coming up really soon, once a piece of software is finished, when we're ready to deliver it to the user, there's a couple little things that aren't exactly intuitive that were never mentioned in any of the classes I took, and ended up being a lot harder than they should have been. So I always like to make sure and mention those. Probably won't get to that tonight. And then, yeah, I just have a list of random odds and ends that aren't on the core learning objectives, which is something else I put on the to-do list because I wanted to remind you all about this. I'll share my screen here. So not just for this class, but in all of your courses on the Ivy Learn shelf. While I'm here, there's no point of this. See, I already have them. The courses for the spring are open. I already have them. They won't open for y'all till like the weekend before or something. But just a good time to send a reminder to register sooner rather than later. We've been trying to cancel classes early enough that the people, like if there's not enough students in the course and it's not going to run, cancel it early enough that the people in the course can switch to something different. For example, in my course is this SDEV 265. That's the project course. By the time people take it, really, it's everybody in there knows how to program by the time they take that course. So it's working on a project, and we focus a lot on documentation and official standards and UML diagrams and a lot of paperwork stuff to go with the project. But right now, there's only one person scheduled for registered for that class, so it's probably not going to run. We try to do that early, and if you weren't aware of it, our dean here in Sellersburg is retiring at the end of this semester. So the classes are probably going to be canceled a little even earlier. That way, while Skip's still here, and that way the new dean doesn't have to deal with that like his first day coming in. So things will be canceled sooner rather than later if the enrollment doesn't seem to be high enough. I think several people are registered for SDEV 120, and there was quite a few last time I looked at the list. I haven't looked at the names on the list, but I did look at how many are signed up for it. And there seemed to be enough to run that. So that's related to this. But that's upcoming. So, long story short, registration is open, so make sure you register sooner rather than later. That way the courses don't get canceled on you, out from under you. Something I wanted to point out, it's not just for our course, but in every course, if you go to the syllabus for the course, you'll see the section course outline of record, the official documentation, what the course is about, description of it, and this right here, major course learning objectives. So There's nothing really subtle about that name. The list of things that are expected to learn in the course. William. And this will be in the syllabus for every one of your courses. As we get near the end of the semester, you always want to take a moment to look at this list. I mentioned it when we went over the syllabus. I like mentioned it again in the semester. Is well, this class is a prerequisite for a lot of other courses. So when you go start those other courses, the instructor is probably going to expect that you learn the stuff on this list. And that's across the board, all your courses and English courses, anything that's a prereq for another course, especially, but everything is going to have this list of major course learning objectives, and it's required to be in the syllabus here at Ivy Tech, so it will be in all your syllabi. As we get near the end of the semester, you want to take a look at these lists, and make sure you feel like you learned everything on the list, which they are sometimes kind of cryptic and involve translation, stuff like that. But when you get near the end of the semester, these are the questions you want to ask if you feel like there's something on the list you're not really sure about. The book mentioned this briefly. Internal software versus semi-external user. Is it something the operating system is going to use, or is it something a human user is going to use? What is the software being written for? Automated things are the stuff we click around on. Maybe another way to put that. Compilers, code generators, basically just ability to run code. We've seen a lot of code run this. Variables, constants, data types, different things we use in programming. That's pretty much all we've done this semester, right? Just program stuff. Identify and use control structures. So I don't think our book used this term. This list was probably pulled from an old book, but we did do that. Does anybody know what control structures are? Have you heard that word? Maybe our book did use it. I'll give you a hint. It's the thing that switches our flow charts from looking like this, just a straight line going down, to maybe splitting out into branches or looping back around the branches. So our selection structures, if else, or loops, the while loops, and the things we use to control the flow of the program. I don't think our book used that term, but control the flow of the instructions. Abstraction, modularization, function, parameter passing. We saw that. Set up functions. We want to abstract them, generalize them so that they're reusable in more situations than just the one we're working on right now. That way we can at least copy and paste and not have to write the same code, not have to rewrite code that we've already debugged. Object-oriented programming concepts, that's the last thing on the list. So after we do the last two buttons on that GUI, which I want to finish because I don't like leaving things unfinished. So we'll finish up those last two buttons, but also that's what I was going to use when we look at how to make an installer package. Maybe tonight, but probably Wednesday. Use case, debug, document. Basically the stuff with testing, making sure the program works like it's supposed to. Written in a very cryptic fashion though, so you'll find these learning objectives are often that way. Problem analysis, algorithm development, program construction. That's pretty much all we've done this semester, right? Some stuff with the Python syntax and then a whole lot of writing programs with Python. Developing algorithms and applying it. Concepts of software development. There was a discussion board on that. There was some really good discussion going on there with that. Different ways to put them together. Waterfall versus agile stuff. Good user interface design. That's what we've been talking about last week. I guess a little bit before Thanksgiving as well. And probably what we want to do, because we don't want to write software that runs in the console. We want to write software with a nice GUI that users can click around on, sort of thing they're familiar with. And we typically don't want to get too fancy with it. That way the user already feels familiar with it the very first time they see our software. Y'all have probably done this before. Going to install software, it's only a couple seconds before you move on to the next item, next version. So you want your users to feel comfortable with what you see there. Software engineering tools, that's IDEs, basically where we write our code. We haven't given up on IDEs yet and asked one of the control back, which I guess that's something I can mention. So keep in mind, one of the character traits that leads to the decision to be a programmer is liking to control things. We don't want to just work with the computer. We're the ones we want to tell the machine what to do. There's sort of a personality trait of liking control that leads to the decision to be a programmer. And that is something to keep in mind because, well, in the classroom, we're mostly working through small examples that fit in our time constraints. But in the real world anymore, software's gotten bigger and bigger and bigger, and it's usually large teams of programmers. And like I just mentioned, a personality trait that leads to the decision to be a programmer is liking to be the person, liking to be in control, wanting to be in control. So when you're on a team of programmers, software developers, software engineers, lots of titles for it. But when you're on a team like that, in a meeting, that room's going to be full of people who like control. So just something to keep in mind moving into the industry. That personality trait is very, very common amongst programmers. Social, legal, ethical issues with software engineering. This one I did want to mention here in just a second. I'm going to switch over to here right after this. Secure programming, that was in the discussion board. And repositories, we looked at GitHub. So I think we've talked about everything on there except on ignoring stuff, and we will get to that. Probably we'll get started to it before the break, because there's only 2 buttons left to do. And they're not done different than the rest of our tkinter stuff, tkinter base package stuff. I will see them there. So it looks like we've covered most of this, but in general, that's going to be on every one of your syllabi. So when you get near the end of the semester, make it a point to look back at that list. And if there's something on the list that you feel like you didn't learn, those are questions you want to ask. Because that's what you're supposed to learn on the course. And this other one, social is kind of general because I like to use analogies and comparisons. So talked about software we've used and stuff, or just society in general. Legal issues, I wanted to mention that. It did show up in the discussion board. Oh, not that. So I think everybody probably moved on by this point. But I was near the end of the semester, everybody gets a little bit busy, and I was starting to fall behind. I even replied to it. But in one of the discussion board postings, Zach mentioned that a lot of software has the colorblind option. And I even responded back on that one, because that's more than just an option that seems like it would be nice. That one is going to be covered under the Americans with Disabilities Act. And that's legal requirements. So if you're going to do something that maybe the government would use, or public institutions like a school, or just once a corporation gets to a certain size of employees or customers, one or the other, they are required to follow the ADA restrictions. So that's a legal thing. Some people in the world are colorblind, so the Americans with Disabilities Act requires that things like user interfaces have that an adjustment so that it works fine for colorblind people. So there are legal issues like that to keep in mind. It was a subtle one. I wasn't going to mention it until somebody saw that when I was creating the discussion boards. I was like, oh yeah, I should probably at least mention that. There's enough material here that to be aware of. It's probably good for now, but keep that in mind as you move forward. That in certain situations there are legal requirements on our things like user interfaces. People with disabilities have to be able to use them as well. And it's not a bad idea to go beyond it. Like quadriplegics often use mouth sticks. They'll have a stick in their mouth, or a cap on the keyboard, sort of a big, long, fancy stylus. So when you're putting something together, keep people like that in mind. It's not an expensive thing, or you can get cheap versions. Obviously, there are very expensive versions because it's a medical device that insurance companies will pay for. But there are cheap versions, so maybe get something like that and make sure that if you are holding one of the mouth sticks, like the quadriplegics have to use on a computer, that you can still use your software effectively. Something to work in, keep in mind, and maybe work in later. Just remember that there are legal requirements like the Americans with Disabilities Act. So mention that. Major course learning objectives, that. Oh, and one other thing, the computer club, now that we're starting to migrate back towards campus a little more, the computer club is going to have a game jam after the semester ends. The semester ends next Tuesday. Please make sure I get all the homework for 11:59 next Tuesday, not tomorrow, 8 days from now. And I wake up early in the mornings, so any grading that's left, I will do first thing Wednesday the 15th. And I wake up early in the morning, so I'll probably be finished with it and have grades submitted by before 7 o'clock in the morning. So make sure you get everything to me before next Tuesday, but I don't think anybody's really very far behind. There might be a couple assignments missing, but nobody has like half a semester's worth of work to do or anything. Everybody's been keeping up on that. But after the semester, once it's time to relax, on the 17th, the computer club is going to have a game jam. So there's a flyer I thought was going to go out over the weekend, but it apparently hasn't gone out yet. So I don't have the flyer. I have the registration form because I put that together, but I will find out what's up with the flyer and send that out. It's a nice, fun way to relax after the end of the semester together with people. It's going to run all day, like 1 to 9. You don't have to be there the whole time, but there are prizes, like a $25 Steam card and a $50 Steam card for prizes. It's a Steam gift card, so that kind of translates to a free game. To relax, have fun with other people, computer IT students here at Ivy Tech, playing video games for an afternoon, win some prizes for it. Ought to be a good time. I thought the flyer was going to go out over the weekend, but it didn't. So I will find out what's up with that and get that information to you all as soon as I can track it down. But it might be fun. I know there's a lot of gamers in the IT department, all the IT programs here. Let's see. Okay, so I guess we can finish up that thing we were looking at last week, just the last couple buttons. Does anybody have any questions before we get started here? I assume the silence means no questions then? Oh, not that button. Share screen. This button. I don't know what I did that Spider always opens in that same thing. So the files are in GitHub. I haven't deleted the files from last week yet. End of the semester is busy time. So I still have the ones from class last week. I'll just open that up and remind you of where we were. think they're in here somewhere. Oh, that's not it. Okay, so here's that file we had up. We were working on last Wednesday, I suppose. Kind of looking at the syntax for the TK interface package, which I believe I mentioned it. If I forgot to, I'll mention it very explicitly now. It is styled with cascading style sheets, CSS, which was added in later. CSS was officially made the standard for websites in 2015. So there is no official standard on how to style our regular GUI library stuff. So once there was a standard somewhere, most of the libraries accept cascading style sheets, CSS files, and the TK interface is no exception. Another nice thing about this being included in Python, which is included in Python because this is what he was working on when he created the Python programming language. He was using this, it was new and fancy then. But from the early experimentation, this is the package that really took off. And while there are lots and lots of libraries to choose from these days when we make our graphical user interfaces, most of them are modeled after this. So learning about this one, will give you a bit of intuition on some of the newer updated ones. So if we don't style it and just go with the default looks, it does look a little old. Looks like it belongs from 20, 25 years ago, but CSS files can quickly take care of that, which an external file is just a text file. That's just a text file you can read in the CSS instructions and pass them to the styling things. Or you can put it right in as a big long string. Either way works. Here's where we were last week. I run and hopefully it won't take too long to start up here. So we set this up so we can pass in some data. I'll put in my name, age and town. Choose one of these items randomly. Just my basic generic classroom example data, name, age, town, something to work with. And we added it to a list box. We got that far. Saw the entry stuff, the drop-down menus. There's some other ones which work very similar. That file I opened by accident. Well, I guess I could open that up real quick and point at that, because that might be a useful one. Just point at, even if it isn't in our example here. It seemed relevant to somebody's final project. That's why I put together a quick example. For those who turned in the assignment on the status report or progress report for the final project, I did put a bunch of comments and try to address your questions and stuff in the grade book. So if you did not see those, let me know. One of them was about a checkbox, and these are things we saw before. So we have this special TK Boolean variable. It's just like our string variable. We have that special one for the GUI package. This one holds a Boolean. And when we create a checkbox, which back in the late 1980s, he wasn't sure what to call it. So one of the people that made up the name, he went with check button. Checkbox is the name we eventually went with, but just wasn't sure what to call it in 1987. So when we set that up, just like normal, we say where it's going to go. And like we saw with the drop-down menus, we have to put that into one of our TK variables. So string variable, Boolean variable, int variable, float variable. We have a bunch of them. But hopefully, having seen the second one now, you'll see the syntax for them. That's the four of them. We have a string var, int var, boolean var, and float var. And we'll just put the option in there. And then whenever we go to check it, that's what we call the .get method on. And the boolean's nice because then it's true or false, so we don't get any fancy stuff in our condition. We can just if and directly put that boolean right there to get an if else to determine if it's checked or not. That wasn't in our example here, so I thought I'd point at that. But very similar to how these go together. And once we add data, we got it as far as the list box where we can select stuff. So we probably want to do stuff with that selection now to quickly finish this up. I guess deleting is a good start one. There's a delete method here already. Our button already calls it and everything. So whenever we want to delete something, we'll select it on the list and then click the delete button. So what we need to do is go in here and figure out which item that is on the list. You can see there's a bunch of names here. I was going to try to point at it, but it's somewhere in that mess of text. It'll show up in the predictive text. We'll grab whatever item is selected and then just remove it from the list. Should be a straightforward process, right? So where'd my method go? Somewhere up here. Oh, there's the delete method. So first thing we're gonna do is grab stuff from the list. So just as a reminder, I did send you that PDF that has kind of become the official documentation for this. Because the original package was made back in the 80s, and a lot of stuff didn't really make it to online documentation. So when somebody put one together, put this really nice one together a couple years ago, it kind of became the unofficial standard, I guess. As soon as that opens. Okay, that seems to take a long time to open. I'm not sure why. But we need to know how to get that thing off the list box. So check the documentation, just to remind you how this string, there'll be a description, then he puts up sort of an example of what it looks like to start writing it. And then the table is all of the options that we can fill in. So everything on this table here is stuff that can go in the constructor. And then somewhere there's a table of things that all of our widgets have. And then afterwards, we have a few methods we can call. Activate it. That says it selects the line. Well, we're going to let the user click on the line to select it. We don't need that one. Other ones, this is the one we want, actually. It's abbreviated, but the cursor selection, I guess it's short abbreviation for cursor selection. I didn't write the name, but that always seemed to make sense when I saw that. So like the cursor selection, it returns a tuple containing the line numbers that have been selected. So that's the one we'll use to grab our thing. And with selection, it's a parameter we can fill when we initialize our list box. By default, it will be a single selection, but we have different options. We can select multiple things, extended. I'm just going to go with single for this. And notice that whether we select a single thing, multiple things together, or just various combinations, like hold control or select different ones around the list. The method we need to get that doesn't specify what selection method we're using. It doesn't say for single mode or for multiple mode. It just says it's going to return a tuple. So even if we're in single mode, we still get a tuple back. It just only has one element in it. So we come back over to Spider. The first thing we want to know is what did we grab? So I'm going to stick that in a variable, maybe call it selected. Let me zoom in, make that a little bit bigger on the screen. Y'all see that okay?
Yes.
Okay, so selected, and that's just going to store what we bring back. So we have that list box in Hungarian notation, since it shows on screen. Again, that event-driven programming, the problems with that. One of the big ones is overly complex. So organization and how we name our variables can help a lot with that. So we have that list display item. And from that, we can call that method, the cur selection. So that'll bring back a tuple of number of the selected items, which by default is single mode selection. So it's only going to be a tuple with one thing in it, but we'll still need that index value to reference it. So well, we're going to delete it. And we have all our data we added to this list called people. Hopefully you remember that from last week. Yeah. Whenever we add something, we just append it to that list. So when we want to get rid of it, we can call the pop method, which, yeah, in the little predictive text there, we can see the pop method is wanting what index are we going to pop out of that list? What are we getting rid of? And we want to get rid of that selected one. But like that documentation just showed, it does return a tuple. So we need the list. So that'll take it off in the background. And to do it in the foreground, we'll need to update the list. You may remember that was kind of coming on the end of the night. So instead of making it a separate method, I just did those 2 lines here, or 3 lines, empty everything out of the list, and empty everything out of the list box, and then loop through our list and put the stuff in the list back on there. So after we delete something, we want to do that same stuff. So I'm going to copy from there and just paste that down here. Because that's not any different. And that would certainly be much, much better in a method, but it was coming on the end of the night the other day, so, when we did that. So it seemed easier just to put that in there. But it's definitely something we'll want to do every time. So it would certainly be better in a method. That's all we need to do to delete data. I guess we could change what the status bar says. Maybe data removed successfully. Some sort of message to start out with here. Eventually, you know, you keep growing your knowledge, and your status bar will have all kinds of fancy little meters and stuff going on. A lot of stuff going there, but to start off with, we'll just throw a message up there to indicate success of what we just did. So now I'll need to add some data. So maybe Sally, 34 from Salem. Pick one of the foods from the list, and Charlie's 23 from Charlestown. Another one of the foods. And then we have that generic thing to put in if we don't have any lists. Like, oh, whoops. Click the button too many times. We're gonna get rid of that. So should be able to select it on the list. And by default, it's single mode selection. So holding control won't let me select different items. You can just set the selection mode to multiple. So if we just select that and hit our delete button, should pull it right off the list. I guess no surprises there. But notice there was 2 parts. The background and the foreground were separate. And that's something that's often going to happen with your graphical user interface, is that separation. It had to do it, take it off the list in the background, and then we had to repeat taking it off the list in the foreground. So keep little things like that in mind. And then the last thing, the last button to make this kind of work, I guess there's some copy and paste, you can make the context menu a little bigger and stuff, but I want to go ahead and move on to the next topic. The last thing is making that edit button work. It's going to be very similar, right? Whenever we want to edit a piece of data, first thing we're going to do is select it on the list. So we'll grab that, the tuple of selected items, which again, we'll look at the display dot cur selection or cur selected. It's past tense, so the thing the user already selected. I assume, oh, where'd it go? Yeah, I assume that stands for cursor selection. Oh, oops, wrong language. It is cursor selection here. Java uses select past tense on the stuff. So once the user has selected something, we'll grab the tuple, and then we want to edit that. So I'm going to copy it over to another piece of data to work with. People, and the index we want is the first item in that selected one. And if you switch to multiple selection, hopefully everybody's comfortable with expanding that out, because y'all have seen how to work with lists and use the different indexes. That just means you're going to have more items in your tuple to work with. And the reason I wanted to go ahead and do this is because one of the instructions in the final project is to open a new window. There's a message box. You do tk.messagebox and have those warnings and confirmations with yes, nos, and pre-built things. You can just Google that. tk.messagebox will take you right to the documentation. But you might also want to open your own custom GUI. And well, the way this is set up in the background, because we're not writing, the libraries do this in the background for us. We can only run one way there at the top when we create our object. Oh, wait, it's below that. When we actually create our object, and then at the end we call that .main loop method, we can only run one of those. But there is, the basic window is built into another widget. There's other things we can do that are like importing the script, another Python script that just opens a GUI would work. But it's much better form to just use the widget for that. So I wanted to go ahead and put that here in the example so you can see that. Those are typically called dialog boxes. So I'm just going to call it that terminology thing. And the widget is called top level with a lowercase l. I have spelled that wrong so many times, or even better, choose it from the predictor text list if that pops up in time. And then just like our other widgets, we want to say where it goes. Okay, we're going to attach it to the GUI. It's an entirely a separate graphical user interface that just pops up in front of our other one. And y'all have seen those many times. For example, here, if I go over to tools and open preferences, hopefully it's not going to take too long. Seems to be running really, really slow. Oh, there it goes. When I do that, an entire new graphic user interface pops up in front of the one that is actually the main one for the software. And it's more than just the dialog box, right? The dialog boxes are the simple ones, or message box is the simple one. Dialog boxes are the more complicated ones. So the message box would have like the warning. Do you want to save before closing? And just a yes or no button. Simple things like that we can do with the message box. If we have something more complicated, we want to make a new GUI. And then once we have that, we fill it out the same way as we did our main GUI. I'll just put the same sort of stuff on there. Maybe a label. We saw how to make a label. tk.label. And where are we going to put it? This time, we're going to put it in the dialog, which I did drift away from the Hungarian notation for this. Normally I do DLG, some sort of description, but that term is not mentioned anywhere in our textbook. So I wanted to make sure and use the proper term here in a spot where you all would see it. So we're gonna put that in the dialog box, and it's the label, so I might as well put some text on there so that that label serves a purpose. Sort of a title for what the dialog box is gonna do. Then we need some entry boxes, just like we did to originally get our input. We have those TK entry boxes to say what we wanted. And I'm going to skip the labeling on them and just go straight to the entry box because we're editing data with this one. So the data we want to edit will be loaded in there. So we'll be able to see immediately which one's the name, which one's the age, and all of that. So I'm just going to go right to the entry. TXT name is a tk.entry. It goes into dialog, and that's all we need for that one. I'm going to leave a space and come back and put our data in there after making box. TXT age again is a TK entry box. It's going to go into dialog. I'm going to leave a space because we have the data we want to show there. So we can come back and put that in after doing this. Sort of that jump around thought again. Put it together in the order our minds think about it in, not necessarily, which isn't necessarily left to right, top to bottom. What else do we have? TXT town is a tk.entry, and load it onto the dialog box. And then we need something for the string. So I'll call it str food is a tk.string variable. Okay, sorry. Zoom was trying to give me warning messages saying the audio is not connected. And it started moving those warning messages to different spots and putting it where my cursor was. It's like, I know my audio is not connected. I have several devices logged onto the same Zoom call. Sorry, but just like we saw with the option menu before, we need a string variable to hold our choice. So it's going to be connected to dialog. And then I'll go ahead and set a value in there. Because this one gets initialized with the value. And we have our person data. I think we have the data of the name we want to change. And it went name, age, town. So the food was the fourth one, which would be index number 3. So eventually we'll do that for all of our data. But that one actually shows up in the initialization. Why is that acting weird? There we go. Then we can make our options menu. OM food that goes with that is a new TK option. I can spell it correctly. Option menu, which is a name that didn't really stick around. Kind of like check button. Just picked the name back in the early 80s, and most people called that a check box instead. Option menus, we usually call those context menus. Context menu is the most common. You might occasionally see it called drop down. Google has weird names for them. Google calls it spinners. Not really sure why. But the option menu is the drop-down list. And just like we saw before, we're going to put it in the dialog. Our variable is going to be that we want to load stuff into that string food variable. And our options are going to be that fave food list. And remember, an asterisk to indicate that you're passing in an entire list, not a single item. Is just part of the Python syntax. Then probably a button. So button edit is a tk.button. We've seen all these things before, right? A dialog and text equals make changes. Because this is for editing stuff. And then once again, just load it all on the screen, the way we've seen before. So what do we have here? There's a LBL title. I'll just pack everything in. I'll do a grid. That way I can make it all line up nicely. Grid row equals 0, column 0. And that's probably, yeah, let's make a small one. Maybe some padding. Well, I'll come back and do the padding after we see this run. Text name. Well, then everything's going to be a copy of that. So just like we saw before, instead of typing every single one out and risking a typo, it's best to just kind of copy and paste this. So quick way is put your cursor anywhere in that line. And if you use your home and end keys, maybe hit home and then hold shift to hit end, it'll select that line, then we can copy and paste that for the rest of them. Let's see, so name, age, town, an option menu, and button. And then it can be better to work down than across. Remember, we talked about this before. You're not constantly changing your mindset back and forth. Just change your mindset once and then change all those. It's like, okay, there's only one column of things in this edit box, so the columns are going to be the same. Then rows. Well, everything's going to go in its own row here. So I'll just kind of walk through here and give everything its own row. The rest of that same. Oh, then the names. So the first one is a txt name. The next one, txt age, txt count. Then our option menu food. And we don't need to load the string in because it's going to come with our option menu. And then our button to actually make the edit. Oh, missing a comment up here. That's probably why the cursor kept trying to go to the wrong spot and stuff. So most of that should look the same. The new thing is the TK top level, which, so now if we come over here and click the edit button from any of our options, got an error message really good. Oh, yeah. Nothing is selected. So we have to have some data in here. Once we have some data, make sure you have something selected. And now we should be able to see that from data. There we go. Most of that we've seen before. The new thing is to create a dialog box. We use that top level widget. Okay. So there's not much room there. Might want to make that a little bit bigger, right? I'll just maybe add some padding in to make that bigger. So like some X padding, maybe a bunch, 30 pixels, and some Y padding of 7 pixels. I just kind of picked a random number, so I'll copy that. And then just kind of scroll down the columns like we did before and paste that in to every one of those. Just to spread it out a little. It tried to minimize the amount of space it takes. So we'll make sure it's at least big enough to see all of our buttons. Once we can select some data, hit edit. There we go. Now we at least see the minimize, the maximize. And notice that I didn't put a title, but it's trying to put a title there. This top level widget, the dialog box, is always connected to that main, our main GUI running. So it inherits the title from that. And then if we could see that data, be able to edit it and just click the button to make changes. So let's do that. It's kind of the same thing we did here. We just want to load it in to that data. It's related to this. Remember when we initially added it and we wanted to bring that into our list, we had to use that .get method, and that grabbed all our text from there. So there should be something like that that we can use in order to put stuff into the entry box the same way. Come back over here, find entry here, descriptions, the normal parameters for it. Oh, and eventually we get down to our list. Delete, that's probably not going to add stuff. That's going to clear it out. That's going to empty it. Just like we saw, I think we did see that the other day. iCursor, index, insert, that sounds like might be useful. Insert a string before the character at the given index. So basically we just want to say where to start writing the string. It's probably at the beginning of the box, index 0, right? It's indexing as far as the letters in this single line text field. So we'll have some data. So whenever we do that, we want to see what data we have. So we can call that insert method, and at index 0, insert the whatever's in that person data, which is what we grabbed from the list after the user made the selection. And once again, you see that separation between the foreground and background. The user makes the selection on the foreground of the GUI, and we have to go to the background and kind of repeat that process. Then we'll take what the user did and repeat it in order to select from our list over there in the background. And then we can work with our data just like we've seen before. Same thing for age, text age.insert. At index 0, the data that was selected, the age will be the second thing, so index 1. Our town data will insert, start at the beginning, and that person data index number 2. Then our string variable already has the third index. So now we should see that data once we do this. I'll put in my information again, pick a random one of these. So now when we hit the edit button, then we see the data that was initially put there, so we can edit it and then do something with this make changes button It should be obvious what needs to happen there. So that when we click that make changes button, it updates the data in the background, redisplays it on the screen, and closes this window so that this is out of the way. And there's a couple ways to do that. What I like to do is to use sort of a helper method. Kind of modularize this a little bit more. Instead of doing that all here in the edit person thing, I'm going to make another button connected to the background that kind of shuts everything down. I'll put it right after this. So I come down and define a new function. I'll go update data. Update a piece of data. We're going to call it from a button click, so we'll want an event. And here we need to worry about scope, because all of this stuff is related to this top level window, which has local scope to this function. So once we move to that other function, we don't have the things with local scope anymore, unless we pass them to it. So we're going to want to pass all that data in somehow. So along with the event, we also want parameters for the name, age, town, and pay food. And at that point, we can just add them to our list, because we'll do this after that button's clicked, so all the data has been edited and everything. And before the user has a chance to change their selection on the list box. So the same thing should still be selected. When you're not under tight time constraints, there's probably some nice error handling you can work in here, just to confirm that the same thing has been selected, or maybe store that someplace globally instead of locally. That way you still have access to the same number you did before. But in most cases, it'll be okay. It wouldn't hurt to have some error handling there. Well, we have our new edited data at this point. So we'll go to that people array, our list holding all of our data that we filled up. And our index is held in that some index from those selections made, which we're still set with default, which is singles mode selection. We only select one item at a time, but it is still a tuple. So we do have to have the indexing there. And we'll just reassign that to those parameters that get filled when we call this method: the name, age, town, and pay food. So at that point, our data should be edited. So all that will be left is just to update the screen. We want to see those changes take place on our list box. And when we do this, it will unselect what the last thing the user clicked on. And that's what, 20 lines of code there? That's going to run way quicker than the user can click the mouse the second time. And 20 lines of code, we're talking nanoseconds. So we'll get down here and clear out the list box and refresh it way quicker than the user has time to make another selection. Is why, for the example here, I bypassed any error handling. But it probably wouldn't be a bad idea to do it. Then we want to close our window. So might need a reference to that passed in as well, so that we can close it from here and just kind of finish everything up from this helper method. So like once we click the button, we're done with all of that stuff, and then we'll come over to this method and close it from here. And to close it, you may have already seen that on our main window, we have the dot quit method. But we're not on a main window, we're on a sub window popped up in front of ours. So we don't want to use quit. We don't want to close out of everything. We want to use just destroy. So that dialog box we have, we're just going to destroy it. We're not actually going to quit our piece of software again. And I guess at that point, we can update our status bar. Update the status to say data edited successfully. And I'm going to put a marker at the end of the indentation section, just to help with clarity, because we saw that problem we saw mention of the problem with event-driven programming is that it's going to be overly complex, hard to debug. So little things we can do with organization can help with that, and keep that in mind from the beginning. Everything there should look familiar. There's not necessarily any new, well, I guess the destroy method is the only new one. You probably saw the quit method, but we don't want to quit ours. We're not finished with our software overall, so we don't want to call quit yet. We just want to close out that window. So now we can just call this method and then pass in the data to fill these parameters. The event will automatically be passed in. Or event needs to be first. We'll pass it in with a lambda. But it's going to have other information. And that's what we'll wait on before calling that method. So just like we saw before, that edit button, we can bind that to some event. It's a button, so I'll just bind it to a left click. And they always look like this, a string, and then inside of angle brackets, the event we're waiting on. In this case, a button -1 is a left click. And then we want to use the keyword lambda. Remember, that basically just means wait. Our textbook went on and on and on about it. It goes all the way back to the 50s. And it just means wait, because we're going to put a method call right here, but we don't want the computer to call that method as soon as it sees that instruction. It's going to wait for an event to happen, and then it'll pass in that event. What do I call that method? Update data. And first thing, we'll pass in the event. I was expecting the predictor text to show up. But then we need our name, age, town, pay food, and a reference to the dialog, which we have up here, and we've seen passing arguments for parameters before. So the name is in that name text entry box, and we can use the .get method to grab it. Same thing with age. The age text box, get whatever's in there. Only we probably want that as a number, so I'm going to cast that as an integer. I'm going to turn it into a number. PHP town, get, we'll grab the next one. And remember, it's our string variable that is going to be holding the choices that we make from that drop-down menu. So str food .get, and then we'll just pull the string right out of it. We don't need to pass the entire front end string variable back. Our other method is only doing things on the back end. And then finally, we want to pass in that dialog box so that we can close it out from the other side. I think that's everything. Why is this still? Is it just not run yet? Oh, the little red dot's not clearing away something again. Probably a parenthesis somewhere. Those. That goes there. And that one goes in. That. Uh-oh. Oh, that should be a colon. After the lambda, we'll make sure that's a colon, not a comma. I accidentally put a comma there. But the normal sort of typos that happen when we're writing code. After 7 weeks of this, I assume y'all are kind of familiar with those things, right? It just takes a matter of looking for it, and oftentimes it's a good idea to look away for a moment and then come back to it. Or one thing I found over the years, this is actually probably best just to, if you know which line the typo's in, just delete the line and retype it. Because oftentimes our eyes will lie to us about what's on the page. Our brain fills in gaps. And when we're looking at a text file, especially programming, it happens a lot. We know what code is supposed to be written there, so our brain will just ignore our eyes and fill in the gap with what's supposed to be on the page. We'll actually see the right thing, not what's actually written there. So it can be useful just to erase it and type it again. So I'll put some data in here, add the person. So avoiding typos, we should be able to edit that data. Maybe the age was entered incorrectly. So we'll go back over here and change that to say 34 instead of 23. We click make changes. Oh. I'm always surprised when I can talk and type at the same time and somehow not end up with typos. But it gives us a way to edit our data. And then all of our different buttons call it the same way. Sally decided she'd rather say pizza's her favorite food. It works on that one, so it should work on multiple pieces of data. I want to move on to the next topic here very shortly. Does anybody have any questions about that? Oh, I guess one other thing. We didn't really address the context menu, but that's going to be copy and paste. Right? We're going down to where we created the context menu. We added a command in it for the add person link, so we should be able to just copy that line and paste it in for our other two functions. And then once again, just kind of walk down here. Instead of add person, we went to a delete person button and an edit person button. And if you start at the end and work backwards, all the stuff will still be in the same place. Kind of like editing, if you're editing an essay, like print it out, make marks with a pen, and you go back to make those changes, it's a really good idea to start at the bottom of the essay and then work back towards the beginning. And that way, as you get to each mark that you made on the paper, it's still in the same place and a lot easier to find. Putting our code together, that can be a useful thing as well. So calling a different method, different label on them. And hopefully you're seeing here that as these build up over time, and we do the same things repeatedly, so there's a lot of copy and paste. So we'll just add all that stuff to the method. Why is it saying there's a typo? Oh, there's a typo. There we go. Now we should be able to edit it from the right click menus as well. And there's some other things, but yes, you see, just copy and paste. And there's a starting point. Okay. I stuck this on GitHub. That was one of the things we looked at repositories. You all saw where I stuck this on GitHub. Actually, I'm going to put it on a different spot on GitHub now. Now I'll put it on the same one. And all that's there, copy and paste. It's a starting point, and you all are welcome to use this. It's on my GitHub page. Yeah, I'm going to put it in a different place so I can show you how to delete a repository. if you need to, because the delete button is hidden. So one last thing to point out on GitHub as well. And then we'll move on to object-oriented stuff. And we can come back to this project and use this to create an installer. Well, maybe I'll load up the installers here and everything to show you that. I'll show you the delete button later. But eventually, here in my GitHub, you'll see there's a repository called Classroom Examples. So since I'm going to show you where the delete button is, it's kind of hidden. It's definitely, because we definitely don't want to accidentally delete a repository. So it takes a minute to get to the delete button and then a bunch of confirmations. So after we look at that button, which I'll go ahead and keep this in here until we go over installers, maybe Wednesday, probably next Monday. Oh, probably Wednesday, actually. It'll be under my repository called Classroom-Examples. So same username and then Classroom-Examples. So this has been updated. So you just click the Add File button. Instead of doing all the branches, we saw that. Much better idea to use the branches, but we can also simply overwrite the main branch. I'll straight the folder in, go read in all those files, and hit commit changes. And you can see it updated the main branch instead of, and we don't have to do all the pull requests and stuff like that. Although that stuff is a good idea. And once again, like a normal, you see the timestamp on there. The thumbnails might be in the way, but you should be able to see the timestamp of how only one of those files actually updated. Everything else is still the same. But when we do that with pull requests and stuff, we can see all those changes. One more thing to do with that later, because I want to walk through the steps of creating an installer package. When we're finished with our software, when we give it to somebody, we're probably not going to give them a folder and just say, paste this on your computer. Sometimes we'll see that in software, but usually that's for software for people that really know what they're doing. What's an example of where I've seen that recently? It doesn't even show up much. Oh, I needed something to view Gerber files. That's the when we make a printed circuit board, the file that we feed into the machine is called a Gerber file. Now I wanted some software to preview those. So it's for making PCB boards, printed circuit boards. So that is definitely something that's only going to be used by electrical engineers, right? And electrical engineers know a thing or two about programming, so they didn't bother to make an installer package for that. They just downloaded the zip file, no installer or anything. Normally, when we give people software to use, whether they download it from our website, send it to our friends, we're going to have a certain type of installer, executable installer, .exe that opens up a little wizard that we step through, looks familiar, kind of goes back to that, the things the users are used to. Or the .msi installers that we just click on and then they run automatically in the background, and all we see is a meter instead of a bunch of options on the dialog box to flip through. Or in a Mac, a dot package are the ones I usually use. What's the other one? Starts with I can't remember the other name on Mac. There's a couple common ones, but there's we have those installer packages. We'll see how to make those. But before we do that, there's one other item we haven't on our main to learn topic list, that major course learning objectives. So we'll look at that, and it looks like 7:15, so it's probably coming on break time, right? So before we do that, probably a good time to take a break while we're right in between topics And then we'll talk about object-oriented programming this evening. Start seeing some examples, see some more of that first thing Wednesday. Then after the break on Wednesday, then we'll come back to that and use that as our example for making a installer file, the installers. And one other little subtle thing that is just a good idea to do. I've subtly mentioned it at least twice this semester. I usually try to quickly and subtly work it in. That way when we actually see it at the end of the semester, it's something you've already heard 2 or 3 times. But before we talk about object-oriented programming, it's probably time for a break. 10 minutes sound good to everybody?
Sounds real good.
All right, so this clock here says 7:16, so we'll get back to it at 7:26. I'll see y'all in a moment.